If you speak more languages, you are a person who understands better how reality works. We are all able to become the much better version of ourselves if we know how to do it and we put the time and the effort.
How did Luca from Italy learn to speak over 11 languages, including Dutch, Swedish, Mandarin Chinese, Hungarian, and a bunch more?
Ну вот в чем дело. Если вы говорите на своем родном языке хорошо, то вы способны выучить любой язык так же хорошо. Ta foi en tes capacités d'apprentissage sera déterminante pour réussir en tant qu'étudiant de langue. Ich werde dir jetzt 6 einfache Tipps geben, die du sofort auswählen kannst.
Well, I think I know how he did it, and in this video we're going to look at exactly how he's done it, including a rather weird back and forth thing. Welcome back to the channel, guys. My name is Ollie Richards, and this channel is dedicated to helping you learn a new language through the power of story, so you can become fluent faster, maybe even as fluent as this guy, Luca Lampariello from Italy, who speaks over 11 languages. In fact, why don't we start there? Why learn so many languages in the first place?
I think that I learn languages because I see languages as a tools and a means to be the better version of myself every day. I think that language learning is great in and of itself, and I was excited when I was a little bit younger about learning new languages and being able to use them. I'm still excited now, but I didn't see the bigger picture.
The bigger picture? Well, I guess the bigger picture would be what? Have more opportunities in life, get a better job, travel, right?
Usually people say, if you speak more languages, you have more opportunities in life, you can get a job, you can travel, etc., etc. I do think that all these things are great. But I think that language learning has changed me as a person, as a citizen of the world. I see all these barriers that we have of misunderstandings among countries, of cultural differences. I truly believe that when you speak a lot of languages, you can understand it. Languages become bridges. They're not barriers anymore.
And so right here, we see one of the things that I've always most admired about Luca. He is quite the philosopher of languages. And he talks extensively about, why learn languages, what purpose languages serve in our lives and in the world. And he talks about all this from the perspective of having learnt a lot of languages to a very, very high level himself. Now, the thing about making a video about someone like Luca is that quite apart from his prolific language learning, he's also created hundreds of videos about language learning on his YouTube channel. So for me, what do I do with that? Well, you may be here hoping for a kind of blow-by-blow breakdown of how Luca has learned all of his languages, but to be honest, you can just go to his YouTube channel for that. What I'm more interested in here, and what I hope will most help you, is this question. When you're as experienced as Luca, when you've devoted your life to learning languages, when you've achieved more with languages than most of us ever will, what do you know that we don't? And that's what I'm going to investigate in this video. But as you know, I always like to start at the beginning because often early language experiences are crucial to understanding the person.
It all started when I was 12, and I remember that my grandmother, she was passionate about education in general, and I remember that when we were at this house that we used to have at near the coast, 100 kilometers from Rome, I was a 12-year-old boy, and she said, "Why don't you come here and let's do some Latin, let's do some French, let's do some math." And that kind of started the whole thing. It was not just languages, it was just about knowledge. I still remember very clearly when she told me, Luca, if you learn this stuff now and you learn how to learn, then you're going to have a great life.
Now, if you've watched my other breakdown videos on this channel, you'll be familiar with this feature of many people's stories, which is this pivotal early experience with languages. Something happens that makes you just tune into the world of languages and see the value in what they have to bring to your life. And in this case, Luca's aunt bringing him round to her house saying, let's learn some Latin, let's learn some French. Not everyone's going to respond so well to that, but Luca clearly did. And the fact that he remembers it to this day means it is most likely a very important influence in him starting to discover the world of languages.
What happened is that my aunt, who also loves languages, and she is a wonderful polyglot as well, she gave me this book, one of the books here, The Tower Treasure. It was a very, very simple book. But the thing that struck me is that immediately after, leafing through the book, I really wanted to understand every single word of this book. I remember looking up every single word. I don't know why, but it had spawned some kind of linguistic monster in me, and I wanted to learn English so bad that my parents decided to hire, as I said, private tutor.
So here we can start to see certain events stacking one on top of each other. He starts to take an interest in French and Latin through his aunt. He develops an interest in English. And listen to what he said. At 12 years old, he wanted to learn English so badly that his parents hired him a private tutor. So I think we can see already at this age, this real passion and interest for languages is really starting to develop. But what happened next seems to be a really pivotal moment in Luca's language career, because he decided to start learning German by himself. And when he did that, he discovered a very interesting method for learning that worked very, very well for him.
I found out a method that worked for me and it worked very well to internalize the patterns of a foreign language. And I started applying that to German. This is called a bidirectional translation, and then it gave me a lot of motivation to learn languages, because I figured out, wow, this actually works.
Interesting. So how does this work?
I take a text which is in the foreign language and in my native language, and I translate it in both directions. So this was my idea, and I articulate this translation into 3 fundamental steps. The first step is understanding. The second one is translating from your foreign language, which I'm going to call L2 for the sake of brevity, into your native language, and then the translating from your native language into the target language.
Interesting. Now, if this is the first time you're hearing about this method, it might be a bit confusing. So let me give you an example. Let's imagine that you are an English speaker and you're learning French. Step 1 is to find a text that you have in both French and in English. And in step 1, you would basically compare the two. You'd read both together in a parallel way so that you can understand what's going on in the French book with the help of the English. That's step 1. Now in step 2, what you do is you translate from the French into English. You do your own custom translation by writing it out. So you end up with your own English translation that you've done by yourself. That's step 2. Step 3 then is to take the English translation that you've done and to try to translate it back into French. And so this back and forth between the languages means that you get to do a really in-depth investigation of how the language works, which gives you this kind of deep understanding of the nuts and bolts of the language, and actually how, not just the words and the phrases, but also how you communicate meaning. Because when you're translating back and forth, you not only have to get the grammar right, but you have to accurately convey what you want to say. So it's a real kind of deep dive into the language. Now I'm going to put a link in the description below to the full talk that you just saw a clip of here so that you can hear it from the horse's mouth, so to speak, if you want to know more about that. But it's quite an intriguing approach, wouldn't you say? And if you find it interesting, then go ahead and hit that like button on the video to let us know. And also please subscribe to the channel if you'd like to see more breakdown videos just like this. Now look, if you are just discovering Luca, you might be wanting to hear more about this bidirectional translation method. But we're actually going to move on, because a method like this is something that you might use to get started in a language. Luca himself would typically do this method for a few months just to get used to a new language, doing what I've heard him call quality work. But if the question we're interested in here is, how do you get really good at a language, way beyond the beginner stage, then something else kicks in, something much more powerful. And we'll come to that in just a minute. But I also like to caution against getting too hung up on any one method as being the holy grail and the secret to your language learning dreams. And here's why.
I always believe in principles rather than methods. If you follow principles, then the method will come as a consequence of that. And people are looking for the best method to learn the language. There's no one best method. There are methods that work and methods that don't work. And there are methods that work for you and methods that don't work for other people.
So what we're going to get into now is the real stuff. We're going to talk about how languages are really learned, but also how they are maintained and mastered. And to understand what this is, let's lay out the most important principle first.
Language learning is an extremely complex entity that we learn easily. The human brain learns easily if you feed it the right way.
Now there is so much to what he just said. Language learning is complex. Yes, it's complex. There is a lot we don't know. But that complexity can fool people into thinking that their response as a language learner needs to be equally complex. But Luca's message is that your brain can do this all. Your brain is far more powerful than any conscious influence you can exert over it. So all you need to do is feed your brain the right information.
Let it get in, let your brain do the work without stressing too much. Don't let your prefrontal cortex fight against the rest of your brain.
Now, as an analogy here, think about putting on muscle. Let's say you wanted to get big and muscly. It's quite a complex process biologically. You've got to tear down muscle fibers in the right way and let them rebuild. But you don't need to understand the biological process. All you have to do, as the person, as the actor, is to get into the gym every day. Quite simple, right? And yet, as we know, it is getting into the gym every day that is also the hardest thing of all. And so what we need to figure out is, what is the language learning equivalent of just setting foot in the gym every day?
The more input you get, the better.
Can we listen to that bit one more time?
The more input you get, the better.
Sometimes things can be so simple that we disregard them. We disregard them for being simple. We prefer instead to kind of hunt for the real secret. But in many ways, what you've just heard is the secret to language learning. It's all you need to know right there. Just like if you want to put on muscle, then the one thing you need to do, and the hardest thing to do, is to just get into the gym and do something every day. With language learning then, the equivalent is to just get input every day. And the more input, the better.
The more input you get, the better.
Yeah, okay, that's enough now. We get it. But do we get it? I wonder how many people hear these 7 words and say, oh yeah, more input, okay. And then go right back to their textbook. Let me give you some perspective here. Here is a guy, Luca, one of the most accomplished language learners out there. He spends a lifetime learning languages to an extraordinary level. And he has one message for you about how to learn languages better. You want to listen to him, right? Well, this is the message. The more input you get, the better. Okay, so we need input. But what kind of input?
You have to go through comprehensible inputs.
Comprehensible input. So input is stuff that you read and listen to, stuff that goes in. Comprehensible input is stuff that you read and listen to that you can actually understand. It needs to be at your level.
If you want to improve your listening comprehension, why don't you rely on on audio that also has a transcript so that you can keep listening to the audio, but at the same time, you can actually understand it, which is rewarding in and of itself.
So when we talk about comprehensible input, we talk about material that is at your level or slightly above your level. But in the real world, there's no such thing as like a magic fountain of comprehensible input that somehow gives you material that is perfect for your level each time. It can be hard to find. And so another way to approach this, and what Luca's talking about here, is to say, all right, maybe I'm going to read and listen to stuff that's too hard for me, but I'm going to make sure I'm interested in it. And I'm going to make sure I choose stuff that also comes with resources that can help you take it in. So if you're listening to something, find something with a transcript. If you are reading something, can you read digitally so you can look up keywords quickly? Something just to give you a leg up.
You can spend maybe 1 hour a day learning a language, and then it pays off. It's called the law of accumulation. So you do something every day. We don't see it. Normal human beings, we see it just a day. But if you stretch it in 350 days, then you see 1 hour a day is a lot of hours.
So here we get to one of the most important lessons of this video for you. Let me ask you this question. How much input do you get on a daily basis? I mean, if you average out every day in the week, exactly how much input do you actually get? Is it less than 1 hour of input? Because if it is, then you could do a lot worse than just forgetting everything else that you're doing and just focus on getting that 1 hour of input. I know how powerful this is because I regularly get emails from people who read my book and say, I've just read your book and I'm blown away by how much more of the language I can understand now. And that's nothing special about my book. It's just the fact that they've never had regular input before and they've just got it for the first time. Remember earlier, language learning can be easy if you feed your brain the right information. Well, this is what that looks like. You learn through input, but not just any input. You read and listen to things that are at your level or else come with resources like transcripts that make the content comprehensible to you.
When I take a shower, for example, if I do some workout in the morning and I take a shower, all that time is dedicated to listening to Polish. So I know that when I start doing some workout or I go running, for example, and then I take a shower, that's the time when I listen to Polish. When I cook, I listen to Russian. When I read, I read in, say, German or other languages. I do a number of things that I don't even think about it. I just do it, instead of just doing stuff just in one language.
So this is advice you've probably heard before. Use your dead time to get more exposure to languages. Fine. But what I want to draw your attention to is what Luca said, 6 little words. He said, I don't even think about it. Now we talked earlier about the fact that setting foot in the gym will be the single biggest predictor of actually losing weight. And to the extent that you could develop the habit of listening and reading daily so that it's automatic, well, that's going to become the single biggest predictor of your success with your target language. And remember here that Luca has been talking about maintaining multiple languages, Polish in the gym, Russian with breakfast, a big smorgasbord of stuff. But if you're just learning one language, then there's a lot of time during the day that you can use for that. But where the game is going to be won or lost is in whether you can establish that habit and keep it up for a period of years. Yeah, did anyone mention that learning languages takes time? Now, at this point, I always get the question, but okay, this is all this input, that's great. But what about speaking? You have to practice speaking, don't you? You can't just read all day.
Wait a little bit, just get input, because without input, if something doesn't get inside your ears, then it can't get out of your mouth.
It always bears repeating. You can't say something that you don't know first. So learn it first, and then speaking will be a lot easier when you get to it.
When you want to improve in your speaking, you have to develop all these 4 skills at the same time so that they create a compound effect. So when you speak, you have to make sure that you go back reading, because speaking, when you speak and you make a mistake, or you try to say something you can't say, you just discover a gap. Then when you take a look at, when you read, you will be more conscious about that kind of gap that you had by reading. And reading helps speaking. Speaking helps writing. Writing helps thinking. And so it's very important that if you want to bring it to the next level, you have to have a strategy in place that entails and encompasses all 4 skills.
In language learning, speaking is the most visible part, right? We can all see and hear if someone speaks well, but this is just the end product. What we don't see is all the other skill building and, frankly, life experience that goes into forming the body of knowledge that then enables you to speak a language. But I personally think that this should be an encouraging message to anyone who feels that perhaps they're not a natural speaker.
We are all able to become the much better version of ourselves if we know how to do it, and if we know why we do it. Learn how to learn, take initiative, have the right attitude, and the limited distractions. You can do wonders.
And someone else who has worked wonders is Lindy, who taught herself over 12 languages, including some really hard ones like Korean and Japanese. She's quite different from Luca, though, in some interesting ways, but I'm not going to tell you what they are. You'll have to click the video to find out.